This is the story of the most disturbing photo that I ever took. And before I start talking in this video, I want to warn you that some of the images that I'm going to show you they're potentially disturbing. It's been almost 20 years since I shot them, when I was working on one of my very first reports for a major news organization. And to be completely honest with you, they still haunt me to this day. I still dream about them sometimes. So if you want to avoid that same burden, I wouldn't blame you. Maybe this is the time to go scroll on to the next video. Otherwise, you've been warned. Okay, so the story starts for me back when I saw a very small local newspaper report about a one-eyed child born at a nearby hospital. And this was back in the days when I was living in India. This was 2006. And I decided to go visit the hospital and see what this story was, because, they had run this really grainy image of the child, and I thought it was fascinating. I figured it was a news story. So I get to the hospital, and a lot of people were curious about this baby, and they were sort of just showing her to, basically anyone who came in. And I walked into the place and I saw her. She was sitting outside on a table with a cloth underneath her, probably to keep her warm, because Chennai was a pretty warm place. And I asked, can I get closer? And as I did, I heard this sort of resonant cry, not like a normal baby cry. There was a sort of something deeper and maybe more echoey about it. And the child, it had no name. It was labeled Baby of Gomati, and Gomati was her mother's name. I came out to find out, and this was her. I think I snapped 4 or maybe 5 photos, and it's what you can see here is there's no nose. There's just one central cavity where the eyeball would be, and behind that there's actually the brain was fused together, and there's no like left or right lobe. It was just one single lobe, and this unusual birth defect is called appropriately cyclopia, and it occurs about 1 in 16,000 animals that are born, but in human fetuses, it occurs in about 1 in 200, and almost all of them are miscarriages. Human babies, they don't survive. If they do, it's more or less their first breaths and it's over. But this one had survived for almost a week. And so I asked, what could have caused this genetic abnormality? And the hospital director, she was a woman, as I recall, told me that it might just be a genetic anomaly, but it could have also been the result of taking a drug called cyclopamine. And you can't make that name up. The drug is called cyclopamine. And it was known that Gomati, the child's mother, had taken fertility treatments because she had miscarried, I think, 3 or 4 times beforehand, and she really wanted to have a baby. But the hospital wouldn't share any contact information or information about what sort of fertility treatments she was taking. Now, I want to talk a little bit about cyclopamine, okay? So back in the 1950s, an Idaho sheep farmer was raising goats in the mountains. He had them chewing on this one field that had a whole lot of these broadleaf plants called corn lilies. And they'd been grazing on there for basically that whole season. And then all of the goats in his herd had this same genetic anomaly. They were all born as cycloptic goats. And this really strange thing, because it happened not just one goat, but to all of the goats. It was reported to the animal public health authorities, who sent out scientists, and they determined that the corn lily, the thing that they were eating, was responsible for creating this very specific genetic defect. What the scientists found is that the corn lily had a chemical in it which activated and regulated something called, and this is crazy, the sonic hedgehog protein. Yes, scientists, when they name their genes and their proteins, and they get to name it whatever they want, and for some reason they named it the sonic hedgehog. Anyway, so this chemical in the corn lily innervates and changes the way the frontal lobe develops at birth. Okay, and so when that protein is secreted incorrectly, you have basically the front of your head fuses or doesn't divide the way it should. So you get this cycloptic birth defect. Now, here's where it all comes back to me. I had been reporting on fraudulent and illegal and unethical clinical trials by Big Pharma in South India since I'd gotten there a few years earlier. And I reported on a Johns Hopkins University testing an experimental anti-cancer drug called letrozole on pregnant women to see if it might also help them ovulate. But they didn't tell the women that what they were signing up for. Meanwhile, there were tons of other clinical trials going on that were resulting in like really bad things. For instance, a company called Shanta Biotech had spent $800 million on a cholesterol drug. It gave it to 1,500 women, and 8 people died in the clinical trial. So when the hospital administrator told me that the woman had taken a fertility treatment, I was wondering, well, could this have been an experimental fertility treatment? Because it turns out cyclopamine, that drug, was actually in clinical trials at the time in the United States to treat both basal cell carcinoma and prostate cancers, because sonic hedgehog, the protein, also has a role in the regulation of the prostate. And, cancer researchers were thinking, well, if we can give cyclopamine to fully formed adult male who have prostates, this might actually slow the prostate growth, prostate cancer, and make people healthier. I was worried that maybe some mad scientist had given cyclopamine to this mother. And I wrote a whole series of stories for Wired News, which is the Wired magazine's website, that now I guess I looked and I can't find them online, but I was trying to understand whether Gomati, the mother, had been given cyclopamine. And I knew she had several miscarriages, and it is possible that she had been given this derivative project as a fertility treatment, as they had done in this city before with other anti-cancer drugs. It's also possible that she had gone to a fertility doctor and she'd had so many miscarriages that somehow the fertility medicine that she was on helped her carry a baby that shouldn't have been carried to term all the way to term. Okay, well, Gomati, she abandoned the child. She never gave it a name, and she died about a week later. And because of modern medicine, many of these children are surviving a lot longer than they ever had in the past. Many times they would die just right after their first breath. But medical science has prolonged their lives into occasionally the weeks, and which does make me wonder, is it morally right to prolong a child's suffering when that child isn't viable? Clearly, these were not lives that could survive in nature. And I thought that was really all there was going to be to the story. This vague notion that just perhaps this child was the result of an illegal clinical trial. I even wrote about that in my book, The Red Market, where I looked at, and I actually enrolled in clinical trials to understand what was going on from the gritty business perspective. And I never found a true answer to what happened with this baby of Gomati. And just when I thought that this story was over, when I couldn't find any more information about what caused this patient's cyclopia, it actually reared up again in 2014. Just when I thought that this story was over, that I would never find out anything more about the baby of Gomati's clinical history, I'd written it off. But then in 2014, something happened. The story changed in a way that I could never have anticipated, because that picture, which had shown up in Wired, had suddenly been picked up by the terrorist organization ISIS, also known as the Islamic State. And they syndicated this photo all across their social media, declaring that this child was the herald of the apocalypse. You see, in the Hadith, which is a scripture of sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, speaks of a one-eyed demon child named Ad-Dajjal, who will hasten the end of the world. And my image is of this cycloptic child, and then also other images of cycloptic children that have shown up in the news were used repeatedly for saying that essentially the Antichrist had been born and was coming in to end the world. Of course, in the Hadith, the child will then grow up to be a full-scale adult, and baby Agomati and every other cycloptic child, well, they actually died. And so this is the story of the most disturbing photo that I've ever taken as a journalist. And that sound, that memory of her cry, it still haunts me at night. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates. Thank you so much to my supporters here on Patreon and on Substack and even on YouTube who make this work possible. It means the world to me that you're here. And if you want to get your name on the honor roll, all you need to do is sign up at the links down below. From Foxtopus Inc. in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.